This podcast is a proud member of the Unidentified Network.
So now, ladies and gentlemen, live and in colour, it's Mr. Wayne Lovejuice.
The other day I produced a Louis, had a chat with an interesting chappie who said that the YouTube algorithms really aren't that happy. If a channel only broadcasts once a week, so we decided we could text ya whenever we've got a piece of news in our new book on the track Xtra. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of On the Track Extra. My name's John Downs, I'm the director of the Centre for Fortean Zoology, and every Wednesday evening at 6:30 for about a quarter of an hour, and every Saturday afternoon at 3 for about twice that, we bring you a miscellany, a mishmash, a melange, and all sorts of other things beginning with M of hard science, weird shit, and surreality. What's surreality? Well, I think you probably, I don't know who you need to ask this week, but I'm sure we'll find somebody.
I think it's got something to do with Uncle V. He's pretty surrealistic.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think Archie was being very prescient there, because the subject of today's show actually is Ve Macrinnon. But just in case you hear noises in the background, Miss Karen and Miss Julie are sorting out the office, or what used to be my office before I discovered that I couldn't really manage the stairs anymore. And it has now become a sort of mini museum ever since the roof fell in of the proper museum.
What is this?
So Karen, do you want to be filmed tidying up the office?
Well, looks like I'm going to be, by the looks of things, with Judy standing there. Yeah.
Look and smile, that's a specimen bottle.
Yeah, what sort of specimen's that?
It's John's specimen.
Hey, that's a good one, that one, John.
But before I disappear down any more rabbit holes, without further ado, let me introduce you to somebody who you've heard about quite often on this show, but very seldom seen. Ladies and gentlemen, it's Mr. Ve Macrinnon! So, Gifford, tell me about your encounter with whatever the hell it was.
Okay, it was in 1980 something. I can't remember the exact year. I was in an outlaw bike club in Dorset, and I was doing sort of survivalist stuff at the time. I was training in survivalist stuff, and I was doing wild foods and things. And one of the things that that the people I was with at the time would do is they would go down to the local river, which I think is the Brit, and they would hunt for young flounders. When it's a river where it's kind of estuarine river, but it's a very, very deep bowl-shaped river. It's been scoured out for thousands of years, and the tide would come in up so far, and it would turn into a salt water environment. Excuse me. And then at a certain point, the tide would go out, and then it would just go back to brackish, and then back to freshwater until the next high tide. So it would have these flounders in it, and they would be maybe maybe 6 inches across at most. Occasionally you come to a 7 or 8 inch one, but they're usually between about 4 and 6 inches across. And you'd have to collect quite a few to get a decent meal out of it. And the way that they would hunt them is, you get those two old-fashioned poles in an old-fashioned tent, aluminium poles with a sort of spiky bit on the top that goes through the two holes in the top of the tent to hold the tent up. Well, they gave me one of those with a fairly blunt end on it, and I was told that you just, it's like that thing in the old cartoons where the guys would go around the park and they would stab the rubbish on the floor and then lift it up, put it in the bag and put it off the end of the thing and go around spiking rubbish like that. Well, you did that with these flounders. And I mean, I wouldn't do that today. I'm much more enlightened about these things than I was then, but I was only in my early 20s then. And I was collecting these flounders, and this river basin is essentially, if you look at it on Google Maps, you'll see that in the middle of this waterway, there are these sort of white and silvery looking things. And the current Google Maps in January 24. And what those things are rocks, big boulders. But if you actually go there, what you find is when the tide is low, the whole riverbed is covered with boulders, variously worn down by the water. And it's got some quite steep U-shaped banks like this with sort of tough green bits coming over the top. So it's quite difficult to climb up and down. And at the same time, they're both lined, both sides are lined with these rocks that are anything from 4 to 12 inches. So, and they can be quite slippery. So once you're in there, you've got to be careful about climbing out. And I was wearing these waders and I had this thing for spiking these fish. And I was down there for some time collecting these flatfish. And then I saw this thing over it seemed to be like it was in the sunshine. It was quite bright, hot sunshine. And this thing was just to the side of the rocks on the bank. Well, not on the bank as in the grassy bit, but on the bank as in the bit that was just above where the water was coming down, because the water was flowing down to the sea. And there were sort of rock pools there that I was walking through that were maybe 12, 18 inches deep water. And I got to the other side and I saw something lying there in the sunshine, and I wasn't sure what it was, but it looked kind of like, well, it was a bit weird. It looked like rope, that old-fashioned rope that they used to use in the 70s and 80s on farms and on ships. That's made, I think it's made of rayon, and it's sort of day-glow orange. And it also used in baling twine and stuff. Very, very iridescent sort of orange. But at the same time, there were other bits of orange around in the environment, because somewhere near there must have been a brick factory at some time, and there were bits of brick, anything from an inch to 6 or 7 inches, that had been rounded off by the water coming in and out. And this thing, it looked, on one level, it looked like a piece of rope that was about 3.5, 4 foot long. And on the other hand, it didn't seem to look like rope. It looked like it was just a series of smooth stones and bits of brick. So it was kind of troubling me in my senses like it was ambiguous in the sensory term. So it sort of got my attention. And I went up to it, and it was stood about 3.5 foot away from it. And I thought, I wonder what that is. So I reached out with this tent, what do you call it, tent pole thing, and I poked it. And I was expecting it to sort of part and show that it was fibers of a piece of rope with bits of sand and, a rock and stuff all over it. I was expecting that it would part away so I could see that it was these strands of a rope. And it didn't do that. I was zeroing in, I was focusing in with my eyes on where the actual top of the tent pole was poking into it. And it wasn't showing signs of being fibrous at all. It wasn't showing signs of being like a piece of wood or a piece of stone. It sort of dipped in like this when the thing poked into it. It poked in like that, and it looked like skin. And I thought, well, that's a bit weird. And then at that point, the sort of subconscious alarm thing that was going on in the back of my head saying, back away from this, it's not a good thing, back away from it now, back away from it. That finally suddenly really kicked in when I realized this is even more anomalous than I thought it was. And so I poked it somewhere else. Obviously, my inquisitiveness overpowered my instinct there. I poked it somewhere else, and it was the same thing. It sort of dimpled in like skin. And I poked it like 3 or 4 times, and I was just about thinking, oh, that's really weird. Anyway, I'm going to go back to flatfish fishing. And just as I pulled the thing away from it, it suddenly hissed, this really loud, vicious sounding hiss, and sort of turned one end to face me. It was like the tail end was on the left and the head end was on the right, and suddenly the head end came up off of the sort of muddy rocky sand and faced me, and then the whole thing sort of swiveled and the head came up, and then it was sort of stood upright like a cobra, and continuing to hiss quite violently towards me, and with its mouth open, and it's had this gaping maw that was filled with teeth that looked like something you would get in one of those films from the abyss, the things with the outlandish teeth that are really long and really sharp and curved, and some of them are a bit shark-like because they've got really sharp edges for cutting, and other ones are clearly for actually hooking into flesh. And it was an absolutely terrifying gob on this thing. And I thought, what am I going to do about this? And I thought, well, I better start retreating, because I've obviously really upset it by poking it so many times, this thing. And so I started trying to do that, but going backwards through water that's 18 inches deep, and you've got 12 to 18 inch thick slippery stones all around you, and I was really worried that if I slipped and I fell down, I'd be below its face on the deck, and it could easily attack me. It could easily get me in the face or in the throat or something, which I sensed was what it wanted. So I sort of tried to back away from it, and I managed to make it to about the middle of the waterway, and at that point its hissing got even louder, which I thought was a bit strange, because I was backing off. I was imposing less and less threat to it, but it seemed to be getting more and more pissed off. And then it started coming at me, and I couldn't understand how it stayed upright, because, as I said before, it was about 3 to 4 foot long. and they only seem to be at 12 to 18 inches of the base of it, like the tail, on the ground. The rest of it was snaked up like a cobra.
So, ladies and gentlemen, that's it for this episode. The reason I'm showing you quite a lengthy rendition of V's experience in Dorset that time is because I have absolutely no idea and no inkling of an idea what it is that he saw. I'll be back on Saturday with more of the Sasquatch archaeologist, and I'll be back next Wednesday with more, the second part, of Ve Macrinnon's account of his encounter with this peculiar monster, whatever it was. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to go through all the stuff about Mr. Macrinnon, are you there? Because I know Mr. Macrinnon's going to be there, but will you be there? Because if you're there and I'm on the desk doing the live chats and everything, I'll be seeing you. That'll do.